overly sensitive is the word they used. And my mother was crying, oh my God, what do we do about this overly sensitive kid?
Lionel Richie's smooth hits hid a life in ruins. Behind the scenes, he faced a $20 million divorce, a violent hotel ambush, and a secret health crisis that nearly silenced his moneymaker forever. From a terrifying spiritual collapse in Alabama to his desperate global hustle for survival, the man who sang about endless love paid the ultimate price for fame. Join us as we uncover the scandalous payouts and family secrets that nearly destroyed this musical icon. The high school heartbreak. Long before he was a global superstar, Lionel Richie was just a kid from Tuskegee, Alabama, living on a college campus. His grandmother was a classical pianist, and his neighborhood was filled with the sounds of gospel and jazz. This environment shaped his musical DNA, but it also introduced him to the woman who would become his first wife, Brenda Harvey. They were the ultimate power couple at Tuskegee Institute. Lionel was a star on the track team and a talented saxophonist, while Brenda was a dedicated student. Their bond was formed in the quiet of a small town, far away from the flashing lights of Hollywood. As Lionel's band, the Commodores, began to climb the charts, Brenda wasn't just a spectator. She was a silent architect of his success. While Lionel was the face of the group, Brenda was often the one keeping his personal life organized and pushing him to stay focused. Songs like 3 Times a Lady were written to celebrate the kind of traditional, enduring love people thought they shared. However, as the hits got bigger, the reality inside their home began to change. The 3 Times a Lady romance was a beautiful image for the public, but behind the scenes, the pressure of fame was creating a deep divide. Lionel was spending months away on tour, and the simple life they started in Alabama was being replaced by the demands of the music industry. In 1983, the couple made a life-changing decision that remained a secret to most of the world for years. They took in a 3-year-old girl named Nicole, whose biological parents were friends of Lionel and struggling to provide for her. By 1989, they officially adopted her. On the outside, it looked like a beautiful act of kindness that completed their family. But in reality, adding a toddler to the mix put even more weight on a marriage that was already leaning toward the collapse. They felt they had to maintain a perfect family image for the global stage, even as their emotional connection was fraying. The breaking point arrived with the astronomical success of Lionel's solo album, Can't Slow Down. It sold over 20 million copies and made him one of the most famous men on the planet. This level of success changed Lionel. Friends and insiders noted that the solo star's vanity began to take over. He was no longer the humble kid from Tuskegee. He was a global icon who required constant attention and praise. His ego grew alongside his bank account, and the partnership he had with Brenda, built on equality and shared history, couldn't survive the shift. He was moving at a pace his marriage couldn't keep up with, and the man who sang about endless love was about to find out that his own was coming to a very public and violent end. But the real trouble didn't start in a courtroom. It started with a secret affair that ended in a middle-of-the-night hotel brawl. The Midnight Hotel Bloodbath. In June 1988, the polished image of Lionel Richie was destroyed during a single night in Beverly Hills. It happened around 2 a.m. at a high-end apartment where Lionel was staying with a woman named Diane Alexander. At the time, Lionel was still married to his college sweetheart, Brenda Harvey. Brenda had become suspicious of Lionel's behavior and decided to track him down. She managed to get a spare key to the apartment and walked in on the two of them. What started as a secret meeting quickly turned into a violent scene that the neighbors and eventually the entire world would never forget. When Brenda found Lionel and Diane together, she lost control. The situation turned into a physical fight that was later described in detail in police records. Brenda allegedly began hitting and kicking both Lionel and Diane. The noise was so loud that people in the building called the police to report a major disturbance. When the officers arrived, they found a room filled with the sounds of screaming and the sight of broken glass. Brenda was so angry that she even struggled with the police officers, who tried to calm her down. She was eventually arrested and taken away in handcuffs, facing serious charges like spousal abuse, trespassing, and resisting arrest. This event caused an immediate tabloid firestorm. For years, Lionel had been known as Mr. Endless Love, the man who sang the most romantic songs in the world. Overnight, that reputation was gone. Every newspaper and magazine featured the story of the hotel brawl and the secret affair. People were shocked to see the man who wrote Hello involved in such a messy and public scandal. The arrests and the details of the assault made Lionel a target for gossip, and the perfect family image he had worked so hard to keep was completely gone. Even though the event happened in 1988, the trouble was far from over. Lionel and Brenda entered a period of 5 years that felt like legal purgatory. They did not get divorced right away. Instead, they spent years arguing in court over money, their property, and the details of their split. This long delay was exhausting for Lionel. By the time the divorce was finally finished in 1993, he was emotionally worn out. He had spent a fortune on legal fees and had lived through years of public embarrassment. He was finally free from his first marriage, but the person he chose to marry next would lead him into an even bigger financial disaster. Lionel thought he was finally moving on to a happy life with Diane, but his bank account was about to take a massive hit. The mistress becomes wife. After the dust finally settled on his first marriage, Lionel Richie made a move that shocked many of his fans. In 1995, he married Diane Alexander. This was scandalous because Diane was the same woman who had been at the center of the violent hotel brawl with his first wife just a few years earlier. While some people thought Lionel was finally following his heart, others saw it as a risky move to marry the person who had been part of such a public disaster. Despite the gossip, they moved forward with a wedding that signaled a fresh start for the singer. For a while, it seemed like Lionel was living in a dream. The couple moved into a massive Beverly Hills mansion that was valued at about $40 million. This was not a normal house. It was a fortress with 30 different rooms, each decorated with the finest furniture and art. Lionel was earning a lot of money, but he was spending it just as fast. To keep their life running, they employed a full-time staff of 9 people. They didn't just drive cars, they traveled across the world in private jets. Lionel was determined to provide a life of extreme luxury for Diane and their 2 new children, Miles and Sophia. However, this fantasy life began to unravel because the costs were simply too high. Even for a superstar, spending millions of dollars on mansions and planes every year is difficult to sustain. While the world looked at their family photos and saw a life of perfect luxury, the reality was that they were burning through cash at an alarming rate. They were living a lavish deception. On the outside, they looked like the ultimate successful family, but on the inside, the bank accounts were starting to suffer. Lionel was under immense pressure to keep performing and keep selling records just to pay for the staff, the upkeep of the house, and the expensive clothes they wore. They maintained this image of new beginnings for several years, acting as though the scandals of the past were completely forgotten. They focused on raising Miles and Sophia in an environment where they never had to hear the word no. But you can only spend more than you earn for so long before the numbers stop adding up. The massive spending habits that Diane had developed during the marriage were about to become the main focus of a very public and very expensive legal battle. The party was about to end, and the bill for this lifestyle was higher than anyone could have imagined. The $20 million shakedown. In 2004, the luxury life Lionel Richie had built with Diane Alexander came to a crashing halt. When the couple decided to divorce, the legal papers filed by Diane shocked the public. She didn't just ask for a small amount of money to get by. She filed a court document that described an incredibly expensive lifestyle that she expected Lionel to keep paying for. She requested more than $300,000 every single month in alimony and child support. To most people, that amount of money is a lifetime of earnings. But for Diane, it was simply what she felt she needed to maintain her daily routine. The most scandalous part of the court filing was the specific breakdown of where that money would go. Diane claimed that she needed a massive maintenance budget just for her physical appearance. The list included $20,000 a year for plastic surgery, $3,000 every month for dermatology appointments, and another $600 a month for massages. It didn't stop at health and beauty. She also requested $15,000 a month for a clothing allowance and $5,000 a month for jewelry. She even asked for money to cover the costs of keeping up their massive mansion, including specific funds for the people who cleaned their windows and took care of their indoor plants. Lionel fought back in court, but the legal battle was draining his resources. While he was still a famous singer, his records weren't selling the way they did in the 1980s. He was no longer at the top of the charts, but his bills were higher than they had ever been. By the time the case was settled, the total cost was estimated at a staggering $20 million. This wasn't just a loss of extra cash. It was a massive portion of his entire life savings. At 55 years old, a time when many people are thinking about retiring, Lionel was watching his fortune disappear. In private, Lionel admitted that he was terrified. He confessed in interviews later that he was seriously afraid he would never recover financially. He felt stripped bare by the legal process and the high demands of the settlement. He was a legend who had sold millions of albums, yet he found himself in a position where he had to count every dollar. He was forced to realize that if he didn't keep working as hard as possible, he could lose everything he had worked for since his days in Alabama. He was a man who sang about easy like Sunday morning, but his financial life had become a nightmare. Lionel was broke and desperate, but the money wasn't the only thing falling apart in his life. Would you like me to continue with the next section about how this chaos affected his children? The children's quiet agony. While Lionel Richie was fighting in courtrooms and trying to save his fortune, his 3 children were living through their own quiet agony. The person most affected in the early years was his oldest daughter, Nicole Richie. Because she was old enough to understand what was happening, the public split between Lionel and his first wife, Brenda, hit her hard. The cheating and the violent hotel scandal were not just stories in a magazine to her. They were the destruction of her daily life. In the early 2000s, Nicole became a constant focus for the news because she was struggling. She had serious problems with drug use, was arrested for driving under the influence, and was involved in very public fights with other celebrities. Many people who knew the family believed that her wild behavior was a direct result of the pain and neglect she felt during her parents' very messy and public divorce. As Lionel moved into his second marriage with Diane Alexander, a new set of problems began for his younger children, Miles and Sophia. Even though they were much younger, they were caught in the middle of a parental Cold War. During the second divorce, the children often became tools that the parents used against each other. Most of the arguments were about money. They fought over how much Lionel should pay for things like private schooling, expensive travel, and designer clothing. When parents argue about the cost of raising their children in front of them, it makes the children feel like they are just a bill to be paid rather than people who are loved. Miles and Sophia had to live in a house where their mother was demanding hundreds of thousands of dollars a month, while their father was trying to protect his remaining wealth. Throughout all of this, Lionel had to wear a performance mask. To pay for the massive legal bills and the monthly payments to his ex-wife, Lionel had to be away from home constantly to perform. He would stand on stages in front of thousands of people, smiling and singing his famous love song, Hello. But his real life was not happy. While he was singing for fans, his own children were often at home feeling lonely. There were times when his children would try to call him, but because of his busy tour schedule or the anger coming from his ex-wives, those calls were not answered. He was working hard to provide them with a life of luxury, but he was not able to provide them with his time. The kids grew up in giant mansions with everything they could want, but they were missing a father who was actually there. Lionel was losing his family, but he was about to make a risky move to get his money back. Would you like me to write the next section about how he performed in secret locations just to pay his bills? The desperate global hustle. By 2004, Lionel Richie was in a position that no music legend wants to be in. He was 55 years old and facing a massive financial hole. To keep up with the $300,000 monthly payments to his ex-wife and cover the $20 million settlement, Lionel had to start what many call his desperate global hustle. In the United States, he wasn't selling as many records as he used to, so he had to look elsewhere for money. He began accepting high-paying jobs in places like the Middle East, Southeast Asia, and Europe. These weren't always big televised concerts. Often, they were private parties for billionaires or corporate events in countries far from home. He was essentially singing for survival. Every time he stepped on a private jet to fly across the world, it wasn't for the glory of fame. It was to make sure he could pay the staggering bills waiting for him back in California. While these international shows kept him from going bankrupt, they were exhausting. Lionel needed a way to make a lot of money without being on an airplane every single week. His financial salvation finally arrived in the form of a judging chair on the television show American Idol. This job was a perfect lifeboat for his career. It gave him a steady, massive paycheck and allowed him to stay in one place. More importantly, it helped rebrand his image. Before the show, many people only remembered him for the scandalous headlines and his messy divorces. On American Idol, a new generation of fans saw him as a kind, wise, and lovable mentor. He went from being a divorce disaster in the tabloids back to being a respected legend. This television role allowed him to pay off his debts and rebuild his savings while sitting comfortably in a studio. Today, the financial storm has passed, but the scars of forever remain. The Richie family dynamic is much better than it was during the years of the parental Cold War. Lionel has worked hard to repair his relationships with Nicole, Miles, and Sophia. They are often seen together at public events, and they seem to have found a sense of peace and forgiveness. However, the high price of his past relationships has changed Lionel's view on marriage forever. He has openly admitted that he has no interest in getting married for a third time. After losing tens of millions of dollars and going through 2 public legal battles, he views a marriage license as a legal trap that he never wants to step into again. Lionel Richie still sings about endless love to sold-out crowds, but in his own life, he has learned that love and marriage are 2 very different things. He has reached a place of emotional and financial stability, but it took years of desperation and a complete career makeover to get there. He survived the shakedown, but the lessons he learned about money and trust have stayed with him. He is now a man who values his freedom and his family above all else, proving that even the biggest legends have to fight their way back from the brink. Lionel finally has his money and his family back, but there is one more secret about his health that almost took it all away. The secret health crisis. While Lionel Richie was fighting to save his bank account and his family, he faced a new and terrifying enemy, his own body. During the highest point of his divorce drama, Lionel experienced what he later called a silent vocal death. For a man whose entire life and fortune depended on his singing voice, this was the ultimate nightmare. He started noticing that he couldn't hit the notes that used to be easy for him. Eventually, his voice began to disappear entirely. At a time when he needed to perform more than ever to pay for his $300,000 monthly support checks, he was suddenly unable to make a sound. The cause was a series of growths called polyps on his vocal cords. These are small, painful bumps that form when a singer pushes their voice too hard or experiences extreme stress. Lionel had to undergo 4 secret surgeries to have these polyps removed. He kept these surgeries a secret from the public because he didn't want the world or his ex-wife's lawyers to know that his moneymaker was broken. If the industry thought he could never sing again, his career would be over instantly. He was sitting in hospital rooms with his bank account approaching zero, wondering if he would ever be able to talk again, let alone sing hello to a stadium full of people. The time he spent in the clinic was filled with absolute desperation. Because the bills were still piling up, Lionel couldn't afford to take the long rest that his doctors recommended. He was often back on stage much too soon after his surgeries. To get through his concerts, he had to use heavy medication to reduce the swelling in his throat. He would stand behind the curtain before a show, terrified that his voice would give out in the middle of a song. He felt like a machine that was falling apart, and the physical toll of the stress was becoming visible. He was losing weight, he wasn't sleeping, and the joy he used to feel while performing had been replaced by a constant, cold fear that he was one scream away from permanent silence. This physical pain eventually led to a total spiritual collapse. Lionel felt like everyone had turned their backs on him. The music industry was looking for the next big star, and his ex-wives were focused on the legal battles. Feeling empty and alone, Lionel did the only thing he could think of. He went back to where it all started. He retreated to his family home in Tuskegee, Alabama. He spent weeks walking the halls of his childhood home and sitting on the porch where he first learned to play music. He was searching for the person he used to be before the fame, the money, and the scandals took over his life. During this time, Lionel fought a private battle with depression that the public never saw. On the outside, he was still the smiling superstar, but on the inside, he felt like he had failed as a husband, a father, and an artist. He spent hours in silence, not just to save his voice, but because he didn't have the energy to speak. He had to learn how to forgive himself for the mistakes he made in his marriages and the time he lost with his children. This quiet time in Alabama was the only thing that saved his mind. He realized that even if he never regained his superstar status, he needed to be healthy for himself and his kids. It was only by hitting this rock bottom that he was able to find the strength to start his massive comeback. Lionel survived the surgeries and the sadness, but he still had to face the final drama involving his youngest daughter and a very famous reality TV star. The brand new betrayal. Just when Lionel Richie thought his life had finally reached a state of calm, a new kind of drama erupted within his own home. This time, the focus was on his youngest daughter, Sophia Richie. In 2017, when Sophia was just 18 years old, she began a very public relationship with Scott Disick, a reality TV star who was 15 years older than her and already had 3 children. For Lionel, this was an explosive situation. He was not just a worried father. He was a man who had lived through the high cost of scandalous relationships. Lionel went on the record saying he was scared to death about the pairing. His fear wasn't just about the age gap, it was an internal fear of history repeating itself. He had seen how infidelity and public drama had destroyed his own marriages, and he was terrified that his youngest daughter was heading down a similar path of heartbreak and tabloid scrutiny. This relationship brought about what many called the Kardashian connection. Because Scott Disick was a major part of the Kardashian family's reality shows, the Richie name was suddenly dragged back into the circus of reality television. Lionel had spent years working to rebuild his image as a dignified legend and a respected judge on American Idol. He wanted to be known for his music and his mentoring, not for who his daughter was dating on a TV show. Being linked to the Kardashian world threatened to undo all that hard work. He found himself being asked about his daughter's boyfriend in every interview, making him feel like the divorce disaster headlines of the past were being replaced by new, equally exhausting gossip. The tension between Lionel and Sophia became so thick that it created a rift in the family. Lionel reportedly tried to use tough love to get Sophia to see his perspective, but it often led to more distance between them. He had to watch from the sidelines as his daughter traveled the world with a man he didn't fully trust, all while the cameras followed their every move. For a man who had fought so hard to keep his private life private, after the 1988 hotel scandal, this new level of exposure felt like a personal betrayal of the quiet life he had tried to build for his children. Beyond the dating drama, these events sparked serious and hushed conversations about the family's future and Lionel's remaining fortune. The scars of the $20 million payout to his second wife, Diane, had never truly healed. Lionel became extremely protective of his wealth. He didn't want the money he had spent his hustle years earning to be lost in another legal battle or wasted by people who didn't understand the value of a dollar. This led to the creation of ironclad legal documents. Lionel made sure that his will and the trust funds for his heirs were designed to protect the Richie legacy. He became a firm believer in prenuptial agreements, making it clear that anyone joining the family through marriage would need to sign one. He wanted to ensure that Nicole, Miles, and Sophia were taken care of, but he also wanted to make sure that no future shakedown could ever happen again. He had learned the hard way that love can be expensive, and he was determined to be the last Richie to lose a fortune in a courtroom. Eventually, Sophia and Scott broke up, and Lionel was able to breathe a sigh of relief. He watched as Sophia moved on to a more stable relationship and eventually got married in a beautiful, dignified ceremony that stayed away from the reality TV chaos. This was the happy ending Lionel had been praying for. He had survived the scandals, the bankruptcies, the health scares, and the family rifts. He had successfully protected his children and his career, proving that even after the worst storms, you can still find your way back to solid ground. Lionel Richie's journey shows that while fame and money can disappear in an instant, the strength of a family is what truly lasts forever. Lionel Richie's journey proves that even global legends face devastating lows. After surviving a $20 million divorce, a career-threatening voice crisis, and intense family rifts, he refused to let the shakedown define him. By reinventing himself on American Idol and protecting his remaining fortune with ironclad legal safeguards, he successfully rebuilt his legacy and his family bonds. Enjoyed this video? Hit like and subscribe to Retro Waves for more unfiltered stories of the legends who rose, fell, and found the strength to sing again.